Boredom is one of the most misunderstood states of the human mind, and in the modern world it is treated like a disease, something to escape instantly through stimulation, noise, scrolling, and constant distraction. But the samurai understood boredom not as a weakness, but as a training ground. Because boredom is the moment where the mind is forced to confront itself without escape. And most people cannot tolerate that confrontation, which is why they flee from silence at the first sign of discomfort. Yet the samurai intentionally entered boredom as a discipline, knowing that the mind reveals its true nature only when it is no longer entertained. And this is where power begins, because boredom strips away artificial motivation and exposes whether your discipline is real or dependent on excitement. And this distinction is critical because excitement is fragile and unreliable, while discipline built in boredom is permanent and unshakable. And the samurai lived in an era without constant stimulation, yet they did not seek entertainment to fill the gaps of time. They used repetition, stillness, and deliberate monotony to harden the mind, understanding that boredom is not empty space, but resistance training for attention. And when the mind learns to stay present without stimulation, it becomes capable of sustained focus under pressure, which is why modern people collapse mentally in silence, while samurai found clarity there. Because boredom triggers the mind's craving for novelty, and craving reveals dependency, and dependency is weakness. And the samurai sought to eliminate dependency by training themselves to remain calm and engaged, even when nothing exciting was happening. Because a warrior who requires stimulation to stay focused cannot be trusted in battle, in leadership, or in life. And boredom exposes the difference between those who act because they must and those who act only when they feel like it. And this is why boredom feels uncomfortable, because it removes emotional rewards and forces you to operate from identity instead of mood. And most people do not realize this, but boredom is the fastest way to discover who you really are, because when external rewards disappear, only your internal structure remains. And if that structure is weak, boredom feels unbearable, while if it is strong, boredom becomes peaceful. And the samurai trained specifically to make boredom tolerable, even welcome, because tolerating boredom means you are no longer controlled by the need for stimulation. And once that need is gone, your attention becomes sovereign, and sovereign attention is power, because it allows you to decide what matters instead of reacting to what is loud. And this is why modern life exhausts people even when they are inactive, because constant stimulation fragments attention into shallow bursts, while boredom forces attention to stretch, deepen, and stabilize. And the samurai used this stretching deliberately, practicing the same movements thousands of times, standing guard for hours, walking long distances in silence, sitting with their thoughts without escape, not because they enjoyed monotony, but because they understood that the mind either grows stronger through repetition or weaker through distraction. And repetition without stimulation trains patience, and patience trains emotional regulation, and emotional regulation trains composure, and composure is the foundation of authority. Because a man who cannot remain composed when nothing is happening will collapse when something does happen. And boredom also reveals hidden impulses, the urge to quit, the urge to seek pleasure, the urge to escape. And these urges are the mind's attempt to avoid discomfort. But the samurai did not suppress these impulses. They observed them, letting them rise and fall without acting on them, which weakened their power over time. Because impulses lose strength when they are not obeyed. And boredom is the environment where this weakening occurs naturally, because there is nothing else to focus on. And this is why boredom feels like restlessness, because the mind is detoxing from constant stimulation, and detox is uncomfortable before it becomes liberating. And once the detox completes, something changes. The mind slows down, attention stabilizes, and thoughts lose urgency. And this state is what modern psychology calls deep focus or flow readiness. But the samurai did not need a name for it. They lived it daily.
And this is why they could enter intense action with calm presence, because their minds were already trained to function without excitement, so excitement did not hijack them. And boredom also trains humility, because it removes the illusion that you are special or entitled to constant engagement, forcing you to earn meaning through action rather than consumption. And this is where modern people fail, because they expect life to entertain them, while the samurai expected themselves to create meaning through discipline. And boredom is the gate you must pass to reach that level of self-command, because only those who can remain steady without reward can be trusted with power. And this principle applies today as strongly as it did centuries ago, because the modern world is designed to eliminate boredom instantly, yet in doing so, it eliminates depth. And depth is where mastery lives. And mastery cannot be rushed, stimulated, or gamified. It must be endured. And boredom is endurance without glory, endurance without applause, endurance without emotional payoff. And this is why it builds real strength, because it trains you to act without needing to feel good first. And once you can act without emotional fuel, you become dangerous in the best way, because nothing external can stop you. And this is the first lesson of how the samurai used boredom to build power. They understood that boredom is not the absence of meaning, it is the absence of distraction. And in that absence, the mind either collapses or sharpens, and the samurai chose to sharpen. Once boredom stops being something you escape and becomes something you enter willingly, a deeper transformation begins, one that most people never experience because they never stay long enough in silence for it to unfold. And this transformation is the shift from reactive living to deliberate living, because boredom removes the emotional highs and lows that normally dictate behavior, leaving you face to face with choice. And choice is where power lives, because power is not intensity, it is control. And the samurai cultivated this control by structuring their lives around disciplined monotony, not as punishment, but as preparation, because monotony trains consistency, and consistency is what builds mastery, not inspiration. And when you repeat actions without excitement, your identity begins to change, because you stop seeing yourself as someone who needs motivation and start seeing yourself as someone who acts regardless of mood. And this identity shift is permanent, because once you realize you can function without stimulation, you are no longer dependent on it. And this is why boredom is threatening to the ego, because the ego wants to feel important, entertained, validated, while boredom strips all of that away and leaves only reality. And the samurai embraced this stripping process, because ego is noise, and noise interferes with perception, and perception is everything in combat, leadership, and self-mastery. And boredom sharpens perception by reducing internal chatter, allowing subtle details to surface, details that distracted minds miss. And this heightened awareness is why the samurai could sense shifts in energy, intention, and timing, because their minds were not cluttered with constant stimulation. And this same principle applies today, because a mind trained in boredom becomes highly sensitive to information, able to detect patterns, anticipate outcomes, and remain calm under uncertainty, while a stimulated mind becomes dull, requiring more and more input to feel engaged. And this dullness is why modern people struggle to focus, because their attention threshold has been weakened by constant novelty. And boredom rebuilds that threshold, increasing your capacity to stay present with a single task for extended periods, which is the foundation of deep work, strategic thinking, and emotional stability. And this is why boredom also heals anxiety, because anxiety thrives on constant mental movement, while boredom forces mental stillness, and stillness reveals that many fears dissolve when not constantly fed. And the samurai discovered this not through therapy or theory, but through lived discipline, standing guard in silence, practicing forms alone, repeating drills until thought disappeared, and in that disappearance, fear lost its grip, because fear requires imagination, and imagination weakens when attention is grounded, and boredom grounds attention by removing stimulation. And once grounded, the mind becomes quieter, more obedient, and more resilient. And this obedience is not submission, it is alignment, because the mind learns to serve the mission instead of seeking pleasure. And when the mind serves instead of leads, chaos ends and clarity emerges. And clarity allows decisive action, and decisive action compounds results over time, creating a life that looks effortless from the outside, but is built on silent endurance inside. And this is why boredom is the gateway to long-term power, because it filters out those who require excitement from those who can operate without it. And power always accumulates in those who can endure without recognition. And the samurai never trained for applause, they trained for inevitability, knowing that discipline compounded quietly until it became unstoppable. And boredom accelerates this compounding by removing emotional dependency. And once emotional dependency is gone, you stop negotiating with discomfort. And once
Negotiation ends, progress accelerates, because you no longer debate whether to act, you simply act. And this simplicity is the highest form of efficiency, because decision fatigue disappears, overthinking fades, and action becomes automatic. And this is the ultimate power boredom offers. It transforms action from something you struggle to initiate into something that flows naturally. And this is why boredom feels like resistance at first, because it is dismantling the false belief that you need stimulation to function. And once that belief collapses, you gain access to a deeper level of freedom, the freedom to choose discipline over desire, presence over pleasure, and mastery over comfort. And this freedom is rare because it requires enduring the phase most people avoid, the quiet, uneventful, unrewarded phase where nothing seems to be happening, but everything is changing internally. And the samurai recognized this phase as sacred because it is where identity is forged, and once forged, it cannot be easily broken. And when boredom becomes familiar, silence becomes peaceful. And when silence becomes peaceful, focus becomes effortless. And when focus becomes effortless, power becomes inevitable. Not power over others, but power over yourself. And that is the only power that lasts. And this is why the samurai did not fear boredom, they respected it, because boredom was the forge, and they were willing to endure the heat, knowing that what emerged on the other side would be sharper, calmer, and unbreakable. As boredom becomes familiar rather than threatening, a critical shift occurs that most people never reach because they abandon the process too early. And that shift is the transition from external motivation to internal command, where action no longer depends on mood, energy, or inspiration, but flows from identity itself. And this is where the samurai truly separated themselves from ordinary men, because once boredom stops triggering restlessness, it begins to generate clarity. And clarity is not excitement, it is steadiness, a calm readiness that allows you to see what matters without emotional distortion. And the samurai used this state to sharpen judgment, because boredom removes urgency, and urgency is the enemy of precision. And when urgency fades, perception expands, allowing subtle details to emerge, details that frantic minds miss. And this expanded perception is why disciplined individuals often appear slower, yet act faster when it counts, because they are not reacting, they are responding. And boredom is what trains this response capacity by slowing the internal tempo of the mind. And once the mind slows, emotional impulses lose their authority, because emotions rely on speed to dominate behavior, and boredom starves them of that speed, weakening their grip over time. And this is why boredom feels uncomfortable initially, because it is dismantling emotional reflexes that once controlled you. And dismantling always feels like loss before it feels like freedom. Yet the samurai accepted this discomfort willingly, knowing that the destruction of reflexive behavior is the construction of conscious control. And conscious control is the essence of mastery, because mastery is not about doing more, it is about doing less with greater precision. And boredom trains this restraint by removing excess movement, excess thought, and excess desire, leaving only what is necessary. And necessity sharpens intention, and intention directs energy efficiently. And this efficiency is what creates quiet dominance, because power without waste compounds rapidly. And this compounding is invisible in the beginning, which is why those addicted to stimulation abandon boredom before it pays dividends.
But the samurai trusted the process because they understood delayed results, training for years without recognition, knowing that discipline matures slowly but expresses itself suddenly. And boredom accelerates this maturation by forcing consistency without reward. And consistency builds reliability, and reliability builds trust, first in yourself, then in others. And a man who trusts himself does not hesitate, because hesitation is rooted in self-doubt. And boredom eliminates self-doubt by proving through repetition that you can endure without escape. And endurance is the foundation of confidence, because confidence is not belief, it is memory, memory of past endurance. And boredom creates that memory daily, reinforcing the identity of someone who does not quit when nothing is happening. And once this identity stabilizes, you stop seeking stimulation, not because you lack desire, but because desire loses urgency. And urgency is what drives impulsive behavior, and impulsive behavior is what weakens long-term outcomes. And this is why boredom also refines ambition, because it filters out shallow goals that require excitement to sustain, leaving only goals rooted in meaning and purpose. And the samurai were ruthless in this filtering process, eliminating pursuits that did not align with their code, because boredom exposes misalignment quickly, making unworthy goals unbearable, while worthy goals remain compelling even in monotony. And this is how boredom becomes a compass, pointing you toward what truly matters by making everything else feel empty. And this emptiness is not depression, it is discernment, the mind shedding illusions of importance. And once illusions fall away, focus sharpens. And with sharpened focus comes an increase in self-respect, because self-respect is built when actions align with values consistently, not when emotions feel good temporarily. And boredom enforces this alignment by removing emotional interference, forcing you to act from principle. And acting from principle creates internal coherence, where thoughts, actions, and identity align. And coherence is strength, because incoherence creates inner conflict, and inner conflict drains energy, while coherence concentrates it. And the samurai cultivated coherence through boredom deliberately, knowing that a man at peace with monotony is dangerous in chaos, because chaos cannot destabilize someone who is already stable without stimulation. And this is why boredom is not passive, it is active resistance against dependency, against distraction, against emotional volatility. And those who endure it long enough emerge with an inner stillness that cannot be shaken easily. And this stillness is not emptiness, it is readiness. Readiness to act decisively when required, and restraint when not. And this balance is what most people lack, oscillating between overreaction and apathy, while the samurai remained centered, and boredom was the axis of that center, training them to remain grounded regardless of external conditions. And once grounded, power becomes less about force and more about presence, and presence influences outcomes without effort, because presence commands attention naturally, and attention follows those who are not desperate for stimulation, validation, or reaction. And this is the silent authority boredom builds, authority that does not announce itself, but is felt. And this is why boredom, when embraced, transforms from discomfort into dominance. Not dominance over others, but dominance over impulse, over fear, over distraction. And once these are mastered, life stops feeling overwhelming and starts feeling navigable, because the noise fades and the path becomes clear. And clarity is the ultimate power the samurai sought, and boredom was one of their sharpest tools for achieving it. At the deepest level of this discipline, boredom ceases to be an experience and becomes a state of neutrality, a baseline where the mind no longer demands stimulation to feel alive. And this neutrality is what allows sustained excellence over long periods of time, because excellence is not built in moments of excitement, it is built in long stretches of quiet repetition. And the samurai structured their lives around this truth, understanding that the rare moments of battle or decision were supported by countless uneventful hours of preparation, and boredom was the container that held those hours together, preventing erosion of focus, patience, and discipline. And once boredom becomes neutral, silence becomes restorative instead of oppressive, allowing the nervous system to reset and stabilize. And this stabilization is crucial, because an overstimulated nervous system interprets everything as threat or opportunity, creating constant tension, while a stabilized system remains calm,
responsive, and deliberate. And the samurai's calm demeanor was not natural temperament, it was trained stability, forged through boredom, repetition, and restraint. And this stability allowed them to think clearly under pressure, because clarity does not emerge from intensity, it emerges from calm. And boredom trains calm by removing artificial highs and lows, creating emotional flatness that supports rational decision-making. And this emotional flatness is misunderstood in modern culture as apathy, but in reality it is composure, the ability to remain unaffected by internal fluctuations. And composure is what allows consistent execution regardless of circumstances. And consistent execution compounds power over time, because small, steady actions outperform sporadic bursts of effort fueled by emotion. And boredom enforces this steadiness by making inconsistency uncomfortable, forcing you to confront gaps in discipline. And this confrontation is uncomfortable because it exposes excuses, and boredom strips excuses mercilessly, leaving only action or surrender. And the samurai always chose action, not dramatic action, but quiet, repetitive action that seemed insignificant in isolation, but devastating in accumulation. And this accumulation is invisible until it is undeniable, which is why boredom also trains faith in the process, because you must trust that effort without immediate reward is not wasted. And this trust is essential for long-term success in any domain, because all meaningful achievements require extended periods of unglamorous work, and those who cannot endure boredom abandon the process prematurely, while those who endure emerge superior without ever needing to compete directly. And this is the hidden advantage boredom offers. It filters competition naturally, because most people quit before mastery is reached, and the samurai understood this, which is why they never rushed, never sought shortcuts, and never relied on motivation.
Because motivation fluctuates while discipline endures, and boredom is the environment where discipline is tested and strengthened. And once strengthened, discipline becomes automatic, removing the need for constant self-control, because habits take over, freeing mental energy for higher-level thinking, strategy, and awareness. And this is where boredom reveals its final gift: space. Space in the mind, space in attention, space in perception, and space allows creativity, insight, and intuition to emerge. Not forced creativity fueled by stimulation, but organic insight arising from stillness. And many of the samurai's strategic insights were born not in battle, but in quiet reflection, during long periods of uneventful training, where the mind, freed from distraction, could connect patterns subconsciously. And this same phenomenon occurs today when the mind is allowed to rest in boredom without interruption, because boredom is not emptiness, it is fertile ground, and when allowed to mature, it produces clarity, foresight, and resilience. And this is why boredom, when embraced, becomes a source of confidence, because confidence grows from knowing you can endure without needing escape, and endurance builds self-trust, and self-trust eliminates fear of silence, fear of stillness, fear of being alone with your thoughts. And once these fears dissolve, external circumstances lose their power to destabilize you, and you become internally anchored, capable of functioning effectively regardless of environment. And this is the ultimate expression of the samurai mindset, self-sufficiency of mind, where peace does not depend on stimulation, validation, or distraction, but arises naturally from internal order. And this order is what boredom builds, patiently, quietly, and relentlessly. And when boredom is no longer feared, nothing external can easily control you, because control relies on hooks, and boredom removes those hooks, leaving you free, focused, and formidable. And this is why the samurai did not seek excitement, they sought mastery. And mastery is born in silence, sharpened in repetition, and sealed in boredom. And those willing to endure this process emerge not louder, not flashier, but stronger, calmer, and unmistakably powerful. At this stage of the training, boredom is no longer something you consciously notice. It becomes background silence.
And in that silence, a new level of self-command emerges, one where discipline no longer feels forced, but inevitable, because inevitability is what separates effort from mastery. And the samurai reached this state not through intensity, but through surrender to repetition, understanding that the mind eventually stops resisting what it can no longer escape. And when resistance ends, energy previously wasted on avoidance is redirected into execution. And this redirection creates a powerful internal shift where action feels natural and inaction feels uncomfortable, reversing the pattern most people live with. And this reversal is the true reward of boredom, because once action becomes the path of least resistance, progress accelerates without strain. And this is why boredom trains long-term dominance rather than short-term motivation, because dominance is about position, not bursts of effort. And the samurai positioned themselves mentally through boredom by removing dependency on excitement, praise, and urgency, allowing them to operate from principle alone. And operating from principle creates internal alignment, where thought, action, and identity reinforce each other instead of pulling in different directions. And this alignment stabilizes the nervous system, making calm your default state rather than something you chase. And calmness amplifies perception, allowing you to sense timing, rhythm, and opportunity intuitively, which is why disciplined individuals often appear to move at exactly the right moment, not rushed, not delayed, but precise. And precision is the highest form of power because it wastes nothing. And boredom trains precision by eliminating excess movement, excess speech, excess thought, and excess desire, leaving only what is necessary. And necessity sharpens intention, and intention guides energy efficiently. And this efficiency compounds silently over time, creating results that seem sudden to outsiders, but are simply the accumulation of years of uneventful discipline. And this is why boredom also teaches humility, because when progress is built quietly, without witnesses, the ego has no stage, forcing you to measure yourself against your own standards rather than external approval. And this internal measurement system is what creates integrity, because integrity is consistency when no one is watching, and boredom ensures that no one is watching, removing all external incentives and leaving only self-respect as motivation. And self-respect is the most stable fuel available, because it does not fluctuate with mood, praise, or success. And once self-respect becomes your primary driver, discipline stops feeling heavy and starts feeling necessary, like breathing or standing upright. And this necessity removes internal debate, because you no longer ask whether you should act, you simply act. And this simplicity is where power consolidates, because decision fatigue disappears and clarity becomes constant. And with constant clarity comes the ability to remain steady during uncertainty, because uncertainty no longer triggers anxiety, it triggers attention. And attention guided by discipline is decisive rather than reactive. And this is why boredom also trains courage, because courage is not the absence of fear, but the refusal to escape discomfort. And boredom is prolonged discomfort without drama. And those who can endure it develop a quiet bravery that does not announce itself, but expresses itself consistently through action. And this bravery allows you to face challenges directly, rather than avoiding them through distraction. And avoidance is what keeps most people weak, because avoidance fragments effort and delays growth, while boredom concentrates effort and accelerates growth. And the samurai understood this deeply, structuring their days around practices that appeared dull on the surface, but were transformative internally. Because boredom stripped life down to essentials, revealing that most suffering comes not from difficulty, but from resistance to difficulty. And once resistance dissolves, difficulty becomes manageable, even welcome, because it signals progress. And this acceptance of difficulty is the final test of boredom training, because once you stop resisting uneventful effort, you gain access to sustained excellence, the kind that does not depend on circumstances. And sustained excellence is what defines true power, because it cannot be taken away by mood, environment, or external chaos. And this is why boredom, fully integrated, turns into an advantage so rare that few recognize it until it is too late to compete. Because by the time others realize the value of monotony, the disciplined have already moved too far ahead to catch.
In the end, boredom reveals itself not as an obstacle, but as a gateway, a threshold that must be crossed by anyone who seeks lasting strength, clarity, and self-mastery. And the samurai crossed this threshold willingly, knowing that what waits beyond is not excitement, but authority, not stimulation, but sovereignty over the self. And this sovereignty is the ultimate form of power, because it cannot be granted or taken away by anyone else. And the modern world does everything in its power to prevent you from ever reaching this state, flooding your attention with noise, novelty, and distraction, because a distracted mind is easier to influence, easier to control, and easier to exhaust, while a mind trained in boredom is resilient, independent, and dangerous in the quietest way. And this is why boredom feels like resistance, because it is resistance. Resistance against dependency, against manipulation, against the need to be constantly entertained to feel alive. And when you sit in boredom without escaping it, you are reclaiming something fundamental, your ability to choose rather than react. And this ability changes everything. Because once you can choose calmly, pressure loses its leverage, urgency loses its power, and fear loses its voice. And this is the state the samurai lived in, a state where action emerged from clarity rather than emotion, and clarity was protected fiercely through silence, repetition, and restraint. And while others chased excitement, the samurai chased refinement, knowing that refinement compounds quietly until it becomes unmistakable. And this is why boredom is the dividing line between those who talk about discipline and those who embody it, because boredom demands proof, not intention. And those who endure it build an inner structure so stable that external chaos cannot penetrate it. And once this structure is built, life stops feeling overwhelming, not because challenges disappear, but because your capacity to meet them has expanded. And this expansion is permanent because it is rooted in identity, not mood. And identity forged in boredom is unshakable because it was built without applause, without validation, and without urgency. And this is the final lesson the samurai left behind, that power is not loud, not rushed, and not stimulated. It is patient, silent, and inevitable. And boredom is the forge where that inevitability is created, slowly, quietly, and without mercy. And those willing to endure it emerge sharper, calmer, and impossible to manipulate, because nothing external can command someone who no longer needs escape. And this is the ultimate freedom boredom offers, the freedom to act with discipline, clarity, and purpose regardless of circumstance. And once you taste that freedom, you no longer fear silence, monotony, or stillness, because you understand that these are not empty spaces, they are the ground where real power grows. And this is why the samurai did not run from boredom, they walked into it daily, knowing that each uneventful moment was shaping them into something formidable, something enduring, something that would remain standing long after excitement faded. And this is the path still available to you now, if you are willing to sit where others flee, endure where others escape, and build where others distract themselves. Because boredom is not the absence of life, it is the training ground for mastery, and mastery, once earned, cannot be taken from you.